Let's say you become the Prime Minister. What are the things that you are going to do? Tell the rest of the world what is your true north. What are the key priorities that you want to focus on? This is your campaign time.
Yeah, well, welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. Today, we have none other than Khairy Jamaluddin with us on the show. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you, Leon. Thanks, Idris. Looking forward to this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so are we. Before we go into some of our topics for today, I thought it would be great to just start by getting to know you a little bit more. Who is Khairy Jamaluddin?
Obviously, I think a lot of people know the public persona, politician, former minister, or failed politician, rather, hiatus right now, podcaster, on radio, broadcaster as well. But my story started in 1976. I was born in the Middle East. I was born in Kuwait. My father worked for the Foreign Service, the Malaysian Diplomatic Service. And as a result of that, I spent many years outside of Malaysia. In fact, I never studied in a Malaysian school because I followed my father everywhere. And when he was about to retire, his last post was in London, in the UK. He sent me to boarding school in Singapore. And then from there, I went to the UK to study. Came back after university. Well, after I did my master's, worked for a bit in London, came back, did various things, joined the civil service, then left, went to finance, and then found my way into politics. And the political story, I think many people are familiar with. And now, just on a break, keluar sekejap.
What drew you into politics initially, and how did maybe your early kind of childhood maybe shape that?
So I have been interested in politics for as long as I have a memory. So when I was growing up, I distinctly remembered being very interested and invested in what my father did. He wasn't in politics, but I consider civil service and especially someone in the foreign service as being adjacent to politics in government. And I remember very clearly a conversation that I had with my father. I grew up in the 80s, so this was about the mid 80s in Japan. He was posted in Tokyo, and this was the height of Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union.
And Japan was on the pedestal at that time.
Absolutely. Japan, this was, he was the first ambassador for Malaysia when we launched the Look East policy. So Mahathir was there every year. Every year. That was one of the most important missions we had overseas. And there was a summit between Gorbachev and Reagan. And I remember asking my father, and I was maybe 7, 8 years old.
Wow, still very young. Yeah?
And quite precocious in terms of wanting to know what was going on. And I remember he said the summit is discussing three things in particular. And he said, one, nuclear proliferation. Second, strategic issues, what we now call geopolitical rivalry. And third, human rights, because there was that was the time where the United States was starting to impose and starting to project their values around the world, juxtaposed with the evil empire of the Soviet Union. And that opened up a world of ideas to me. And then I started seeing things in a different way, the world stage. So my father introduced me to the world, not just by bringing me around, but really opened my eyes in how actors around the world, whether they were state actors, non-state actors, individual leaders, really made decisions that affected many, many millions of people. And Secondly, my mother, although she followed my father around as the wife of a diplomat, every time she came back and every time she had the opportunity, she was very involved in voluntary work, very involved in what we would now call civil society, one of the founding members of Patiwi and all these things. So that element of service also came through her. And when I went to university, I studied PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics. And it doesn't mean just because you study political science, you end up becoming a politician. But I was drawn to the political world by my upbringing, by what I felt was important in the world. And politics, more than anything else, apart from the service, is about trying to organize society in a way that is fair. That's how I define politics. You're involved in this system. You're involved in this process. Obviously, you need a democratic mandate to be in government. But I think the ultimate aim of politics, other than service, is to be able to organize society and organize the resources, the finite, limited resources that you have, in a way that's fair and in a way that works for the country.
On the topic of organizing society towards a greater good, you mentioned, you described actors on the world stage. So there is, on the one hand, you've obviously got the service, and that, I suppose, is the true north of any politician.
Yeah.
Is service to the people, service to the nation. But the reality is also, in order to influence, in order to organize a big body of people, you also have to gain and garner popularity. You've got to win their votes.
Of course.
How do you hold that tension between kind of building a kind of persona and also being a charismatic leader, while also staying true to the mission?
I don't think they are mutually exclusive. Politics and the cut and thrust of politics is about being able to bring people with you. If you can't bring people with you, then you are a useless politician. Politician needs to be able to win support, needs to be able to do difficult things. And I remember when I was health minister, one of the great privileges that I had was attending this course in Harvard that Idris arranged for me. And whoever goes to the Harvard Kennedy School knows this particular lesson on leadership. How does the Harvard Kennedy School define leadership? It's being able to disappoint people at the rate that they can accept. That's what politics is about, because you have to make difficult decisions. They're finite resources. You can't please everyone. Otherwise, you'll go bankrupt as a country. So coming back to that tension, you have to be able to lead, bring people with you, even though you know you have to disappoint them. But make sure you disappoint them at the rate they can accept. Otherwise, you lose. And if you lose, you're no good to anyone, because you have to make sure that people support you. And that's the bread and butter of a politician.
I want to jump in here because that is it hits right down to the core of what one has to do in politics. When Dato Najib was in government, and I was there at the time, he understood completely the fiscal issue. He needed to say, we need to raise some money to make sure we have money to do public transport. That's why we have today the MRT.
Yeah.
Needed to make changes with our education system and our health system. We needed money to do it. But he said, we must do it in a manner that we don't overborrow, because he was worried that we're overgeared. In fact, it was a session, he said, I can grow the economy at double digit. If I borrow a lot of money and we do a lot of public activities and spend money, we could do that. Increase the GDP at double digit. We shall not do that.
Yeah.
Because that's growing the economy on steroids.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable. So we have to then work on the private sector to do it. So he took the hard decisions to introduce GST.
Yeah.
He also took the hard decision also to rationalize subsidy. Now, if I put that aside, now the current government, when they came in, they got rid of the GST, and they also stalled the subsidy rationalization. But now they are beginning to realize that they need money to go and do it. How would you rate the Madani government in the context of their promises for reform?
When Anwar became Prime Minister, a few months after he became Prime Minister, he invited me to the Treasury for a meeting with some of his advisors. And he asked for ideas. What would you like to see us do? So I said, apart from some programs which I felt were important and which I felt could attract investments, that have now been implemented somewhat, I said there are 3 big structural economic reforms that you have to tackle. Any government in Malaysia will have to tackle these 3 things eventually. Whether you do it or not, that's your risk appetite. And that's, your political judgment, whether or not you feel you can disappoint people at that rate. One, I said, was tax reform.
Right.
You know that our tax base is too small. Too small compared to other countries. And we don't even have to talk about developed countries. Talk about countries which are our peers in terms of our GDP.
Sure.
Our tax base is just too small. The number of people that pay tax in Malaysia is disproportionately small to our peers. And that creates a problem for the government because your revenue base is too small. That's why we did the GST. So I said, you have to address this first. Tax reform. Whether that's expanding your SST, whether it's GST, whether it's something. But I did say to him, I said, that to see the most efficient way to do this is GST or value-added tax.
Yes.
Consumption tax, basically. Which he admitted it is. It is. So I said that's one, which they haven't done. They've expanded the SST. It's been postponed, delayed. But then again, it's not an efficient system.
Yeah, we know that.
We know this. We know the arguments. Secondly, I said subsidy rationalization. Continue with what
we started.
Najib, even Pak Lah actually started it. It was
correct.
He made that brave decision to raise petrol prices, and it came with considerable political cost.
I remember that.
Pak Lah started it, Najib continued it, and I said, you have to do this. Because subsidies are regressive and subsidies are also non-productive. And I said, the biggest elephant in the middle of the room is RON 95.
Yes.
No, the others are at the margins. Diesel is at the margin. RON 95 is really
the big deal.
The elephant in the middle of the room, right? So I said, that's number 2. And number 3, Idris, you will know this, is pension reform.
Sure.
Pension reform. Because that line item alone is what now maybe north of 20 billion a year. And it's going to rise. It's going to rise because the number of civil servants who are going to retire over the next 10 years.
Life expectancy.
Life expectancy has gone up.
Yeah.
And that is going to reach north of 30 billion in the next 10 years or so.
Yeah.
So I said, you have to make a decision. Okay, civil servants who are in service and who have retired.
Yeah.
We have an agreement. We have a contract with them. So they get pension, no problem. But every new hire, move them to EPF scheme.
Absolutely.
Move them to EPF scheme. So there's no contractual obligation already. This is a new deal.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's tough luck for the new generation. Many different countries have moved away from this compulsory pension because you cannot sustain it. You cannot sustain it. So I said these 3 things. So how would I rate? Tax reform, not done. Subsidy rationalization, it looks like, Idris, it looks like
they're going to do it now.
Well, I don't know. Diesel's done. Diesel's done. RON 95 went from B40 to now T10 to maybe T5 to just foreigners. I don't know. So we wait and see. So partially done. And pension reform, he hasn't touched at all. So the rating has to reflect that. So if out of 3 big structural reforms, it's 1.5. So it's 50%.
I mean, most people say no money, no talk. The problem is that if you don't do those 3 things, you don't have enough money to make all the changes you want to do on the health system.
Right.
You don't have enough money for the education system and our public transport. Many things you can't do without money.
Sure.
That's why those things are fundamental. I totally agree with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
On the topic of kind of making difficult decisions, you're quite an interesting case because you are, some might argue, a thoroughbred politician. And yet, in some ways, you function like a technocrat as well. And I think we saw this especially in your time, leading us through the COVID pandemic as health minister, you were grounded in stats, in figures, and you had a tough mandate to get people to get vaccinated, and there were a lot of challenges, and you were also on the ground a lot. Some people might say that there is almost a dichotomy between a politician and a technocrat. But what are your thoughts in terms of how these two can play together, and perhaps how we can maybe not see them as completely two opposing things, but how can we begin to integrate those disciplines in the way that people lead?
I think there are politicians who are interested in the politics and less interested in policy, less interested in how things work. They are just focused on winning the next election. I am not that kind of politician. I actually like the work. I'm actually interested in the work. And coming back to the true north, other than service, is I'm interested in organizing society in a way that's fair. That's what drives me. And when I'm given a task, I've served minister 3 times, youth and sports together with Idris in cabinet. Then I was science minister, I was health minister, and in between I was coordinating minister for the vaccination program. The first thing is you have to master your brief. You have to master your brief. And the biggest complaint that I have as a former minister, and something that I would like to change if I had the chance to be back in government and run cabinet, is I want to change the onboarding of ministers. Idris will know this.
Yeah.
Because the moment a minister is announced and appointed, almost the very next day, they see the press. And the press asks them, what are your priorities? This guy doesn't know what day it is. And you're asking him a question or her a question. And she or he has to pretend. I mean, fake it till you make it, right? They've not even been briefed by all the departments. So ideally, this onboarding process must take a bit more time. Give the ministers 2 or 3 weeks to really figure out where the light switches are in the ministry, find out what is really important to the stakeholders, and onboard themselves. I remember when I was appointed health minister, I had some goodwill with one of the big consulting companies because they did work for me before. So I asked them, can you help onboard me? That was my own initiative.
Okay.
And I had virtual sessions, and they brought in their partners from all over the world. Healthcare financing, public health economics, looking at how other countries transform their hospitals, because I felt that was important.
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor.
Yeah,
I'm not a
sure.
public. We don't appoint people based on their specialty, because of the Westminster system, we appoint politicians. So I felt the onboarding was important. And if you don't onboard yourself properly on day 1, on week 1, then you're forever chasing yourself, chasing your tail.
Yeah. It's like you don't have a license and yet you're given the keys to a Ferrari
100%.
straight away.
100%. So you can add the L dulu lah. Right. And people have to have that expectation that the minister is onboarding themselves, at least for the first few weeks. It's not like they're not doing work. It's not like they don't know what's happening. But you want somebody who's considered, somebody who's measured, somebody who knows what's realistic, what can be done, rather than just somebody on day 1 just, spewing absolute nonsense.
You may remember, Khairy, that during the time of the COVID-19 crisis, my team and I developed the global COVID index.
Yes.
And I must say that this is the only index that's approved by WHO.
We had a meeting with Tedros.
Correct.
Yeah.
We had a meeting, and you were a patron to an advisor to what we were trying to do. And I wanted to make sure it's a fair assessment on a daily basis of the countries. There were 130 countries that were on the list. And we ranked them from number 1 to number 30.
Sure.
During your tenure, we were consistently in the top 10 based on the data that is provided out there in terms of the measures that what the countries were doing. Tell us more about what did you do in government that put Malaysia in the pedestal among the top 10?
I always like to tell the story of type of leader. This is simplified somewhat, obviously, but you have your wartime general and you have your peacetime leader. And this thing has been written many, many times. Wartime leader is somebody who can corral resources in a crisis, a bit more aggressive in breaking down the silos and getting things done quickly, maybe breaking the rules of protocol. Peacetime leader, of course, is consensus, diplomacy. Clearly, I'm not cut out for peacetime leadership, expelled from the party. I love a campaign. So whether it was the SEA Games in 2017, whether it's COVID, you have your true north. You have your strategy mapped out, your objective, and you, on a daily basis, you're in the trenches, designing the tactics to meet that. I love that. Nothing more exhilarating than that for me. And I remember we moved. So I said, the first thing is we have to have our bunker, basically, our trenches. And I moved everyone out of the normal offices, MOSTI, and then later Ministry of Health. Got this place in Putrajaya, special precinct F or some parcel F or something like that, where, the old buildings in Putrajaya, Idris, it's designed according to protocol.
Yes. I remember.
It's designed according to protocol.
So give an example.
Design protocol. So you walk into the office and this room is the private secretary, this room is the press secretary, political secretary, the SUSK leads up to the minister's room, That's not being in the trenches with your troops. That's where the general is in the back in the HQ where everyone is fighting in the front lines. So I said we must change the way we do this. So I said, let's get this office. I had a room just like anyone else. My room was same size as my KSU, same size as my directors of the task force, so that we were there together.
Yeah.
We were seen to be there together. And it's important because when the troops see the generals there together, decision-making is easier. You don't have to wait for a meeting. You just walk in and say, what's going on? Because this is on a daily basis, saving lives on a daily basis, making sure that the vaccination centers are up and running, making sure that the vaccines are being delivered. Vaccines don't save lives. Vaccinations do. If the vaccine is sitting in the freezer, it doesn't save lives. You have to jab people. And at our height, we were doing 500,000 jabs a day. It was one of the highest per capita in the world.
In the world.
Yeah,
we were
one.
Totally au fait with the data.
Absolutely. And it was about really, really having my hands on the wheel, but at the same time supporting people so that they can succeed. You can't have your hands on the wheel to the extent that people can't do their jobs. But you have to have your hands on the wheel because you have to take accountability. On a daily basis, things were happening. Cabinet had already given me the mandate to run with this. So I had to run with it. And of course, on a daily basis, you were fighting fire, crisis, on a regular cadence. But it was about being in the trenches with the troops. It was about making sure at the end of the day, we knew what the true north was. And the true north was always not that we were 500,000 a day, not that we were the fastest vaccinating country in the world, but the true north was actually reopening safely. That was always it. We have to get back to normal.
Sure.
We have to win normalcy. I drilled that to the troops. The victory here is actually normalcy. And we managed to do it. 1st of April 2022, we opened our borders.
And I can attest to that. I mean, you mentioned being there with the troops, but I think in the process, you were also there with the people in many ways. I remember at the vaccination centers, I saw you there. But I think also most notably, I have a cousin who's on the spectrum, and he was there, and he was having a hard time getting the jab. And because you were proximate, you were around, you actually lent a hand to him and his parents as well to make sure that he could get his jab with the least resistance and drama possible. So I just want to take this moment to say thank you. And I think in a moment, we can also talk a little bit more about your own personal experience in parenting a neurodiverse child. But let's now talk about reinvention. So you've even in politics and government, you held many portfolios. You touched a little bit about your method in ensuring that you're briefed properly. I think largely that's having a learner's attitude to really find out how things are done and not pretending like you are the expert in the one thing. Then coming out of politics, then going into podcasting, a radio host, what was that journey like for you?
It was difficult at first because unlike 2018, when we lost, that was the election which Najib lost, 2018, but I still retained my seat. So although I was no longer a minister, I was still a member of parliament and looking forward to playing a role as a opposition MP, keep the government honest, check and balance. So although I had lost my ministerial brief, I still had something to do. This time around, I lost everything. So in November 2022, during the election, I was sent to Sungai Buloh 3 days before nomination, a seat where we lost by 26,000 the election before. I brought that down to 2,000 plus, still lost. And so I lost my ministerial post. I lost my seat in parliament. And then a few months after that, I was sacked from the party. So nothing. And at first, it was tough. It was tough because I didn't know what to do. And almost by chance, I was running. I like to run. And one night I was running, and instead of wanting to listen to music, which I normally do, I looked for a podcast because that's when people started listening to podcasts. And I came across this podcast called The Rest is Politics.
Yes.
Alistair Campbell, Rory Stewart, two guys who were thrown out of their parties as well. And I thought to myself, well, I'll put it on. Maybe after 15 minutes, I'll switch. After all, who's going to listen to two guys talk about politics for an hour, right? But after an hour of running and listening to these guys, I was hooked. I can't believe I just listened to two guys talk about politics for an hour. So I called Jarrell and I messaged him or called him, can't remember. And I said, listen to this. Maybe this is something...
He was also sacked from party.
He was suspended from the party.
Yes,
so I said, maybe this is something we should do in Malaysia. So we got a couple of microphones. It was nothing fancy back then. And the rest is history.
Another great podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I'm big fan of yours as well. But I think there were podcasts before.
Yes.
But in a small way, KS, Keluar Sekejap, I think also was a trailblazer in many ways for other podcasts to come about, but not just podcasts to come about, for people to be comfortable with the podcast medium.
Yeah.
People didn't know what podcasts were before. It was a very niche thing. And something that I'm also happy about is, and helping all of us in the podcast scene, advertisers know about podcasts now. They know the value in podcasts. So people are willing to spend. So now we're a business. We employ people, we work with brands. And that was the root of this particular reincarnation or reinvention. But more than that, I think in the last 2 years, I remember when I'm a big mixed martial arts fan in the UFC. So this guy called Alexander Volkanovski, he lost his belt and then he won it back again. After he won it back again, I remember this line that he said during the post-fight interview. He said, adversity is a privilege. And I love that quote because adversity, although we don't wish it on anyone, but if it comes your way, embrace it. It's a privilege. It's a privilege. And, Leon, we were just speaking before the podcast about running. I'm not a natural endurance athlete. When I was young, I sprinted. So anything above 200 meters was too far for me. And I played football. But I hated cross country. I hated distance running. But in my late 30s, I started running, distance running. And I like running now. I'm not particularly good at it, but I like running. And you know why I run? I run because I want to get comfortable with discomfort. Running is extremely uncomfortable. It's one of the worst things that you can put yourself through mentally and physically, especially if you're running more than an hour or so. But I do it so that my brain is hardwired to be comfortable with discomfort because of what's happened to me and my career trajectory. I always tell myself, always be prepared to be comfortable with discomfort.
That's an interesting point because I think one of the beauties of long form, podcasts and things like that is the ability to have more kind of nuanced conversation. And I know on your podcast, you have also had maybe some slightly more confrontational conversations as well with people. What's your view? We had your podcast partner, Sharil, on the show recently. But what's your view in terms of how you can use conversation to open up public discourse and ultimately actually shape policy?
I think the reason why podcasts have exploded onto the scene, one, of course, it's the normal things that you hear about podcasts, is that it's unfiltered. You're not mindful of time. You're not rushing to close the segment because there's advertisers are waiting to have their ads played. You are able to be more candid than in a press interview. But also you have to be mindful sometimes because you have to remember that sometimes podcasts are picked up on news. And that's when your podcasts and your considered arguments turn into the sound bites. So people are still wary of that. And we get picked up on the news quite a bit because we speak about politics. But I think the more substantive reason why podcasts have succeeded, and if you look at election cycles around the world, Trump, his last interview wasn't with CNN, it wasn't with Fox, it was with Joe Rogan. The Singapore elections recently, I met up with my former colleague, Health Minister Ong Ye Kung, when he was in KL last week. He went on podcast for 2 hours, whatever it was, 2 days before the last day before the election. I think it's because, like you said, there's this appreciation of the long form. People, especially people who are interested in issues, it's almost the revenge of the long form against the soundbite. And people are more willing to be invested in a long conversation, in a detailed deep dive, rather than just the superficial 10-second, 15-second soundbite that you used to get on TikTok and Instagram. So I think it's good for public discourse because it allows for depth of views, which otherwise would not be heard. And it allows for you to really broaden your horizons because there's a podcast on any given topic. And it's almost like a buffet out there, and you can go and really learn things on a daily basis. It's fantastic.
I want to jump in here. You made reference to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Last month, I was back in Harvard. And of course, the conversation wasn't about Donald Trump. But because it was held in Harvard, everyone was just talking about Donald Trump. Yeah. I mean, the key here is that he wants to make America great again. I kind of think that there is a view that Donald Trump is in a denial mode. A little bit about like Churchill was in a denial during the Second World War. He didn't realize that the British Empire was on a decline. Today, the American Empire is also on a decline. We are no longer going to return to the unipolar world that was dominated by USA. We are entering into a completely new phase, which is multipolar. But he is going through a very difficult denial period. There is no way you can stop the ascendance of China and India coming in, and BRICS as well, and EU. US will continue to be a big influencer in the global stage, but it's not unipolar. It's not a hegemon, US hegemony. So today, when you think about what he's doing, and he's putting in the trade war, increasing the tariff, it's almost like declaring war against everybody else. What is your view about Donald Trump in this shifting global order?
He's a huge disruptor. Whether that disruption is for good or for bad depends on who you support. I think many people who are rational, who believe in a rules-based world order, feel that he is a disruptor for bad. I think that, unfortunately, having said that, he resonates with a lot of people, especially in the United States. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had such a clear margin of victory at the election. And we can discuss why we think that happened. But coming back to your question, Idris, about the decline of the United States, the decline of great powers, we also have to remember that Pax Americana is actually a tiny blip in the history of civilizations.
Yeah, very small.
It's a small blip.
Yeah.
We take it for granted that the United States has been all dominant for so long, but it's not so long.
It's only since Second World War.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Since 1945, post World War II. You can make an argument that before that, maybe it was a rising power, but really the American dominance is 1945 onwards. And in the large sweep of human civilization, you said the rise of China. In fact, China is just, the sleeping China is just a blip. Before that, it was the Middle Kingdom. So taking that into context and looking at countries like Iran, like Russia, like China, these are the great civilizations of the world, not America.
Yeah.
America succeeded because it had an idea that was, at that point in time, seductive. American dream. It had the ability to build an economy very quickly and deploy that with innovation. So there's a lot of good things that still can be said about America. I think it's still the most innovative country in the world. I think it's still the most entrepreneurial country in the world. And I do think it's on the decline, but how much it will decline and how fast it will decline, I'm not sure yet. I still think that it has the best universities in the world, regardless of Trump's assault on Harvard. And as you said, Idris, the president of Harvard came and said, they will outlast Trump.
Yeah, sure.
Trump's only going to be there for another three and a half years.
Yeah.
Harvard's going to be there for another 1,000 years plus, whatever. So I'm not sure how fast and how quick the decline will take place. Yes, there is a rising China. There are multiple centers of power right now, but I wouldn't discount America completely. I think that it will continue to be relevant, innovative, entrepreneurial. But coming back to Trump, I always wonder, is he really the maverick, art of the deal, business genius, or is he absolutely clueless? And I'm not sure. You look at the tariffs, for instance. Is this a great bluff to get people to come and offer concessions? Or really has he miscalculated his hand? And now they're calling it the taco tariff. Trump always chickens out.
Yeah.
And he was really angry about it. He said, don't ever say that again. Don't ever say that again. You saw that, right? In the Oval Office. So, I mean, I'm inclined to think that he is actually misplaced and a bit clueless.
I think the thing he did with the South African president was also completely wrong. He was misinformed. Yeah. The video was put out there was completely...
I mean, Julius is not even member of the South African government.
Incredible.
Yeah. Everyone knows Juju is this rabble rouser, and he just wanted to embarrass Ramaphosa.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what Trump does.
Yeah.
He's a bully. Yeah, so, but coming back to why he resonates, I think it's also, and this is an important point, I think the elites have also failed.
Yeah.
The ordinary person in the United States. When the political elites fail, the Democratic Party, Idris, you know this, they were the party of the blue-collar worker. Joe Biden came from Delaware. He was a champion of the left-wing, progressive worker movement, and the Democratic Party, unfortunately, starting with Clinton and then Obama and then later Biden, absolutely left that segment, their core supporter, unattended. What is in it for us? Stop talking about this woke society. Stop talking about green transition, because it's meaningless to me. It's meaningless to me because I've lost my job. I'm in the Rust Belt. I'm in the Midwest. And this doesn't make sense. This is a party which is unrecognizable. So that's why when you have the likes of AOC and when you have the likes of Bernie now launching the Fight the Patriarchy, returning the Democratic Party to the original roots of progressiveness, of fighting for the ordinary person on the street, although there's still a bit of considerable bit of wokeism still there, which I'm not comfortable with. That's when you rally your base. The Democratic Party could not rally their base. They lost their base, and that's why they lost. That base became the red wall, the Republican base.
There's one thing you had to give to Donald Trump. The man made lots of promises in the electoral campaign. He really went to do them.
Whether it's good or bad.
He really, I think a lot of people thought, never mind, we'll vote for him. He wouldn't really do some of those things. He really went to do them. I mean, he said, by the way, he was interviewed by Oprah Winfrey many years ago when he was a young man. It might have been 13 years ago or 16 years ago. It's still on YouTube. He said everything he said then about tariff.
Yeah.
And he's been consistent. And so when he said he was going to increase the tariff for the rest of the world, and he really went to do them.
Yeah. This is consistent. I mean, it's not a newfound passion.
Yeah.
I mean, his hero is William McKinley, who is the president who raised tariffs.
Yeah, Leon.
What are some learnings then that we can take in Malaysia from what we see going on in the US, and what are maybe some things that we can be cautious of here? And then maybe from there, I think, what are the signals for reform?
I think the first lesson, the first key takeaway from looking at what's happening in the US is to make sure that you don't lose your connection with the proverbial man or woman on the street. Elites can be disconnected. When you're disconnected, then very, very unintended results can happen. Elections world over now are extremely unpredictable because of the elite disconnect. So I think if you want to prevent unintended outcome at the elections, even here in Malaysia, then you have to make sure that that base that you've been servicing, your party continues to be recognizable to that base. You don't want to be in the situation like the Democrats that I mentioned earlier, where you can't recognize. And you're starting to see this now in the UK with the rise of reform.
Right.
Why is Nigel Farage the second most powerful leader in the UK right now after Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister?
Yeah.
It's not even the Tory leader. Nobody even knows Kemi Badenoch.
Yeah.
It's Nigel Farage.
Correct.
Because the base doesn't recognize the Tory party anymore. Johnson, Truss destroyed the party. Even some Labour supporters are looking at reform now because Labour is unrecognizable to them. So you have to make sure that your key identity of who you are, why you are there, still resonates with your supporters. The moment you are some Coke Zero version of what you should be is when they start looking for the real deal. And that's when an unintended outcome can happen, something that nobody could predict.
Yeah, I like that point. I mean, like, for context, those of you who are maybe less familiar with British politics, Nigel Farage has often been seen as the clown of British politics. And yet, because he's pandering to that base, that's been able to help him consolidate actually a lot more favor. And people are taking him a bit more seriously now.
You know, Leon, politics is a very touch and feel thing. It's a touch and feel thing. Of course, you want to impress people with your intellectual prowess on ideas and policies and things like that. But why is Nigel Farage so important, apart from his rabble-rousing, apart from his stoking of fears? Because of the leaders, who do you want? This is somebody in the UK, so for Muslim listeners, I just want to caveat that. Who do you want to have a pint with in the pub?
Yeah.
You want to have a pint with Nigel Farage? For sure. And
Not summer.
yeah, and that's what politics is. It's touch and feel.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's touch and feel.
I want to jump in here. I recall that when you were in government, you championed the N50. You saw that as a very important point we stand in the future as a country. What do we visually want to see Malaysia to become in the year 2050? Then you work backwards from today, managing the present from the future. And it was very clearly crystal out there. I know that you talked about the possibility of becoming the future Prime Minister of Malaysia. Let's say you become the Prime Minister. What are the things that you are going to do? Tell the rest of the world here is the opportunity for you to say, what is your true north? What are the key priorities that you want to focus on? This is your campaign time.
Yeah, well, some of it obviously we wanna keep,
Yeah,
so
sure.
that there's a element of
Surprise.
surprise also. I think that's very important, that you don't oversell your agenda, and also because it can be appropriated before you get there. But I think of the ministries, let's start with the ministries first that I think are important. And some of these answers are going to be cliched, but they're cliched for a reason, obviously. I think education, but education has to be reimagined, because the K-12 model will be increasingly obsolete or incomplete over the next 15, all the way up to 2050. There's a necessity for people to be trained, their brains hardwired from when they are small, to get used to reinvention. Because throughout their careers, their roles and responsibilities can become obsolete, have to pivot because of AI, because of automation, things like that. So it's not just about having better schools, better teachers, but also reimagining how we train and how we impart skills into people. So I think that would be a huge pillar of any future premiership, whether it's me or whether it's anyone else. Secondly, I always say that in this country, we have several ticking time bombs that if you don't take care of it, they will explode. And if they explode, then the cost of having to treat the damage will be more than if you could defuse the bomb right now. And the ticking time bomb that I'm concerned about, there are twin ticking time bombs. One is the aging population that we've spoken of earlier. But the problem is people are not just living longer, they're living extra years in ill health, in bad health. And that comes to the second ticking time bomb, which is our non-communicable disease burden.
Yeah.
It's one of the highest
problem
in the region, whether it's diabetes, whether it's hypertension, cardiovascular disease. The cost of preventive medicine is much less curative medicine. By the time you go to potong kaki and all that, it's going to cost you a lot more, the public purse a lot more. So health reform, not just in terms of diffusing this ticking time bomb, but also making sure that health financing is sustainable, I think is going to be crucial for any future prime minister. Otherwise, your fiscal bill just to treat people is going to be considerable. So health, education. And the third, sometimes we take this for granted because we look at the skyscrapers in KL, but we have a chronic underinvestment in infrastructure in certain areas. I'm not saying everywhere, but in certain areas. If you look at our logistic and transport network, it can be so much better. It can be so much better. And this is investment that has multiplier effect. These are investments. We were in cabinet together. Your DE investments, your development expenditure spent properly doesn't just have a multiplier for the construction phase, but it has a multiplier in terms of opening up regions, of making people, creating opportunities that don't exist. And I think that we have unfortunately spent too little on key infrastructure in certain areas and certain geographic areas. So those are the three things in terms of big bucket items for ministerial priorities. On style of government, also I will change. I think that ministers and also the Prime Minister needs to be more engaged at the delivery level. So one thing that I always admired Idris for was how he focused on delivery. He was essentially the delivery unit for government in PEMANDU. And I think if you structure the Prime Minister's office, you have to have certain units that operate to support the Prime Minister and also to support the cabinet and government. One is, of course, the policy unit, which is the core of keeping everyone on message and facing true north. Secondly, comms unit, because you have to communicate and bring everyone with you. Third, you have to have a delivery unit. And you have to work with the civil servants to have that delivery unit. I think one of the challenges that PEMANDU had, I was watching from the outside, but also as a supporter, as a cabinet colleague, was having to work with the civil servants, getting them on board. Because you can't transpose a foreign entity into government. They will drown you out, and rightly so. So you have to have a delivery unit. And the fourth unit that I would have in the PM's office or in the PM's department under the PM is a strategy unit. So that's your, you have people, the three units looking at the day-to-day tactics, but you have to have the guys who are there not to answer to Parliament, but to look ahead around the corner, what's going to happen. So I would reorganize how government is run in that sense.
So there's institutional reform, but then, you touched on the civil service, and there's also, I think, a need for then systemic change as well. And so that's now veering into the area of mindset, which is a lot harder to shift. So for you, what are some handles for leading and also changing mindsets?
I always believe that leadership by example is a strong catalyst for behavioral change. It's as simple as that. If the person that you are being led by, whether it's your parents, whether it's your captain in a team, if they're behaving a certain way, you tend to want to behave the way that they're behaving, even if it's not desirable. And wherever I've gone, I've tried to bring people together by how I lead the ministry or how I act. The first thing is, the first thing I tell everyone when day one at any ministry is, I understand there's a need for protocol, but let's not have protocol get in the way of the best ideas. Because if there's too much protocol in the room, the best ideas don't surface to the top. Everyone's mindful, I can't say this because who am I? My boss is sitting there, I'm behind. So let's get rid of that on day one. And that creates for a culture where ideas are free-flowing. No one gets censured for saying the wrong things. Once the decision is made, it's collective and everyone gets behind it. And I do believe, I wanted to share an experience that I had when I was first made minister. Idris was already in cabinet then. I remember the chief secretary to cabinet, to government then was Tan Sri Ali Hamzah, the late Ali Hamzah. Great guy.
I remember him.
Fantastic guy.
Cool guy.
Yeah, really nice guy. First week. So the first week that you are a minister, Idris doesn't have this experience because he was in JPM, he was in Prime Minister's department. But the first week you are a minister in a standalone ministry, first thing that you want to do is change your KSU. The mistaken belief that if I appoint a new KSU, then that KSU is beholden to me.
Right.
The old KSU is the ex-minister's guy. Okay. So I remember everyone made a beeline for Ali Hamzah after the first cabinet meeting saying, can I change my KSU? So I did the same thing, a new minister, the same thing. Ali Hamzah pulls me aside and says, can I give you an advice as a young man?
Yeah.
And I was fine. He was an older person, okay. Although I was a minister and he was a KSN, said the test of a good leader is to be able to work with what you have.
Right.
In other words, he said, I'm not going to give you a new KSU. And I think, that really is, that was a good lesson for me. But 2 months later, he gave me a new KSU without me asking. But it was a good lesson for me because especially something like the government, Leon, you can't change it. It's a behemoth. It's a leviathan, right? So it's the test of a really good minister and good prime minister, good leader, is getting the most out of that. Getting the most out of that.
So you were given advice, and I think to that, what is your approach then to investing in the next generation of leaders?
Oh, I mean, look, I believe in promoting people regardless of their age. When I was at KBS, and this is another KSU change, but it wasn't because I requested it. My KSU was promoted to a bigger ministry. So Dato Jamil went to the domestic trade ministry. There was a vacancy. And I spoke to the then KSN and said, can I get a minister who approximates my age rather than somebody who is 2 years to go till retirement? And we promoted Lokman, who was then, I think, in his mid 40s. Now he's KSU still in MITI, if I'm not mistaken. And when I was in health as well, I wanted to bring somebody who was my age and elevate to KSU. So I think, and I understand, we have to tread carefully because in civil service, seniority matters, time-based promotion is important. But at the same time, I looked at myself. When Najib appointed me as minister, I was still in my 30s. And to get that opportunity was not easy. And if he could take a chance on me, and I remember Pak Lah also had promoted young people. Mahathir, contrary to what many people think, when he was first made Prime Minister in 1981, he had young people around him. Musa then was young, Pak Lah then was young, Najib came in, Isa was in his 30s, made Menteri Besar of Negeri Sembilan. So I think this tradition of promoting young people is actually there in Malaysia. It's just that maybe we've forgotten it.
And how has your role as a family man and as a husband, as a dad, shaped your general approach to leadership?
Leading at home is different from leading, I think, government or business or an organization. Leading at home needs a completely different skill set, I think, because it's personal. Sometimes when you lead an organization or in politics, it's in abstract because you're making big decisions affecting people that you don't necessarily meet. But leading at home is obviously the most important job you have. My most important job is as a father. Even if I one day, if God wills it, scale to the heights of the Prime Minister's office, I will always say that my most important job is being a father. And that requires a lot of patience, that requires a lot of empathy, because what you plan and what your idea of a future for your child is very different from what they eventually will want. And that requires you to have empathy and love to support your child in what it is that they excel in and what it is that they want to do in life. So I demarcate my life quite strictly, a boundary. I don't want my family to be in the public eye. I think it's very important that at least my children grow up as normally as possible. And I try to, now I have the time, of course, to spend quality time with them, which is good. My sons absolutely do not want me to go back to politics. They were unhappy when they heard that I was considering a return. But then, just as I said, I respect you and your dreams, and I don't want to project my dreams onto you.
Yeah.
Then you also have to respect my dreams. But coming back to this abstract, I just wanted to share another story. When I was doing COVID, I was suffering from extremely bad mental health challenges because of the pressure. And that spilled over into bad physical health. So my blood pressure was through the roof. To the extent where I remember going around as health minister. Sometimes there are events, and at the events that the health minister attends, there's always a nurse there. There's always a healthcare corner where you can do your blood tests and blood pressure and things like that.
You didn't want to.
I absolutely refused to have my blood pressure taken. The DG of health looking over me and looking at my blood pressure. This is nobody's business but mine. Why am I doing blood pressure? Idris, I'm sure you've been to these carnivals, right? Where you ask me to take blood pressure, and it's through the roof, obviously. But coming back to the point, I had extremely bad mental health. Blood pressure was through the roof. I'd gained 10 kilograms, whatever it was, really bad shape. And because I was making decisions in the abstract and I was getting slammed on a daily basis on whether it was vaccinations were late, didn't get the appointments, my Sujatra not working, whatever it was. And every night, I would open my email inbox and there were hundreds, if not thousands of emails. And I would choose 10 emails randomly, which I would personally reply to. Because I wanted to make the abstract personal.
Yeah, sure.
And that was that was very therapeutic for me. Just replying individual people to make the abstract personal. So in a way, I suppose that is also reflected in the personal role as a father and the abstract that you have to deal with as a politician.
You have, I know you're a parent to a child with autism. I kind of think that in Malaysia, we don't put enough emphasis in our system, in our education system for people like your child. We have a nephew. He's also on quite a high end of that spectrum. I believe that this country really have to make reforms in our education system. The rest of the public life facilities is out there for people like that. What do you think the government should do today? Not waiting for you to return, but right now to make changes that would be appropriate here.
The true measure of success for any civilization or any country for that matter is how it supports and how it treats people who need support, people at the margins, whether they are disabled or whether they have unique challenges. And on that score, I think Malaysia has come a long way, but we're not there yet. We have to put this front and center. So I always like to speak about these issues with examples rather than just speak about it in abstract. So Leon, you mentioned earlier about the vaccination experience of your cousin. I wanted to share that. It wasn't, yes, it was influenced in part because Timur, my second son, who's now 16, is on the spectrum. He is autistic. But if you really put the patient, in that case people, at the center of your vaccination journey, then you have to make sure that it is not an afterthought. It is not, later we will think about it, but it's built into the mainstream of the planning. And our guidelines for vaccination for COVID were so clear and successful that even was adopted by Singapore because we put it front and center.
Right.
You have to start by building something fit for purpose. It's not, put an OKU ramp after the fact. It's when you design and draw up a building, it's designed in a way that is inclusive already. Not an OKU ramp, but the entire thing is fit for purpose. And that comes to the point where your orientation as a policy maker, as a leader, designs society, coming back to designing society in a way that is inclusive, not as an afterthought. So our vaccination centers and processes were built in from day one that there is a calming room, that people were educated at the vaccination centers to know, to spot, and to be able to understand what to do when someone neurodiverse came in. We had centers specifically, drive-through centers, not just for anyone, because we don't want to divide, stigmatize, saying that this is for, okay, because it has to be built in together. One of the things that I started, Nori now runs, is we have this kids' gym where it's friendly. It's called We Rock the Spectrum. It's a franchise that we took from the United States, from America. We were there on a holiday and I found it by chance. And so I took Timor and my other son, Jibril. I don't know if Rafe was already born then. But the purpose of the gym is not for neurodiverse. It's where all kids can play and where parents don't have to say sorry. So that's the whole ethos. You don't divide. You build things so that everyone is there. And then it comes normalizing. It's not something new. It's not so the question that I think Idris asked, of course, one big one is resources. But beyond resources, you can throw money at a problem. But if things are not designed in a particular way from day one, it's not going to succeed. When I was health minister, I tried to start this Majlis Autism Negara, National Autism Council, because as with anything else, it requires whole of government and whole of society approach, not just MOH, it's also MOE, it's also Ministry for Social Development, Community Development. Without having me to come back, I hope that that thing starts again. I mean, I've heard it's been sort of cold storaged.
And to close, Khairy, you talked about a place where parents don't have to say sorry. But on the flip side of that, I'd like to close with hearing your thoughts on what would be the kind of legacy that you would like to be unapologetic about in leaving behind.
So I thought about this question in a different iteration. I thought about if one day when I'm not around, if someone were to ask somebody who knew me or were to Google me and the search engine optimization pushes up one word, what would it be? And, as a politician, many different words come to mind that you want to be associated or that you want on your epithet: visionary, charismatic, consequential. And then I thought about what I do. I thought about my true north, which is service to make sure that society is structured in a way that is fair. So the word I came up with is helpful. He was a helpful person. He was a helpful guy. And that's always been, I suppose, my ethos in life. I've always just been helpful. If you need something, ask KJ, will he help you out, sort you out? And I think that more than anything else has a quality that will stay with people, that you've helped them in a way. You don't need grand vision. You don't need excessive charisma. You just have to be there for people when it counts.
Well, and this has certainly been very helpful to be able to learn from you. So, Khairy, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your gems with us today.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to yet another episode of The Game of Impossible. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did. If you did, we encourage you to subscribe to both our YouTube and our Spotify. We also have short form content that goes out on IG as well as TikTok at The Game of Impossible. Episodes go out every week, every Friday at 6 a.m. So we'll see you next week.